Hello and welcome to this presentation about using grounded theory in a pilot study. My name is Olivia Amourgis. I'm a PhD candidate at Central Queensland University here in Australia. And today my supervisor, Associate Professor Stephen Pace, and I will be chatting to you about how I use constructivist grounded theory for my honours research. So the core focus in this study was cognitive absorption on social media. In other words, that state where you get so absorbed in social media that you lose track of time, you might lose awareness of what's happening around you, and even experience a loss of self-awareness. For example, you might come out of being absorbed in social media and realize you were super hungry and you hadn't noticed while being in that absorption state. So in this presentation, I'm going to introduce the current research on social media absorption and give you an overview of the project. And then Steve will jump in. He'll discuss the qualitative methods used within the study, and then he'll hand back to me and I'll present the results and how this study has helped to bridge gaps in understanding social media absorption. But before we continue, I want to invite you to think about your own experiences with social media, or if you don't use social media, maybe consider your observations of other people while they're using it. For example, have you ever been so absorbed in social media that you've lost track of time? Maybe you didn't hear when someone was speaking to you or didn't notice someone entered the room. Have you ever suddenly stopped scrolling and thought, what on earth am I doing? Because you'd open Instagram to do one thing and suddenly become absorbed in another. Or maybe you suddenly realized you were starving or busting to go to the bathroom when your concentration was broken and you hadn't again noticed while you were scrolling. So my research aims to better understand this absorption experience. What's causing it? What are its characteristics? And how does it affect social media users? So what do we know so far? Research shows that cognitive absorption states on social media are linked to both positive and negative outcomes. We can see here on the screen some positive effects on the left, including strengthening social ties, relieving stress, and positive brand association. And then on the right, we've got some of the negative effects that have been found within research, including impulse buying, excess screen time, and addictive social media tendencies. So the negative effects are particularly concerning as excess screen time and addictive social media tendencies are associated with a higher risk of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and even poor impulse control. So what do we know about social media's cognitive absorption states? Most studies currently define cognitive absorption on social media as what is known as a flow experience. So to understand my research, you'll need to understand a little bit about flow. And now some of you may already be familiar with this absorption experience, but those of you who aren't, I'll run through a little bit about it. So flow was defined by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi following over half a century of research. And from all of his studies, Csikszentmihalyi actually defined flow as an enjoyable experience with 8 core characteristics. So here we have an outline of the core characteristics as defined by Csikszentmihalyi. So we'll begin with a balance of challenge and skill. And this has been highlighted here in green as Csikszentmihalyi defined this as a key component to a flow experience. And it will be important to understand this when we get to the research results. So he found that if the activity was too easy, our mind would wander or we would get bored. And if it was too difficult, it might become a bit overwhelming. So both of those would prevent us from becoming absorbed within the activity. But if it was this perfect balance of challenge and skill, it would require all of our cognitive resources to perform the activity, which would then trigger complete concentration, as we've got here. And then it would lead to other experience characteristics that we can see here, including a loss of self-awareness. So like we spoke about before, unaware of feeling hungry, time distortion. So it might pass more quickly or more slowly. And the merging of action and awareness. So that is when you don't have to think about your actions. They just become second nature and feel automatic. For example, someone playing video games, they become so immersed within the task that they forget that they're using the controls and they feel like one with the activity. A sense of control, clear goals and immediate feedback are also key components that help us to maintain a flow state. And then obviously we have a sense of enjoyment over here as well. So I want you to take a moment to think about when you've experienced the characteristics I've just described. You might have experienced flow while writing a report, going for a jog, maybe even potentially drawing or painting if you're into art, playing video games like we spoke about before, or even surfing. And I've included here a great description of flow from a surfer. So as we read through, we can see how they reference different flow characteristics, including complete concentration. So they've described here being in the zone, nothing else there, nothing else in your mind, and nothing else matters. We can also see a description of time distortion when they say that time stands still and everything becomes slow motion. There is an example of a sense of control here, being you are able to control the most uncontrollable. They also describe feeling like they can surf the best here at the end. And a sense of achievement and personal growth are often associated with the flow experience. So again, I want you to think about your social media absorption experiences and how they relate to this, including the differences and similarities to the flow experience descriptions that I've provided here. So for example, do you feel like you're performing your best when you're scrolling through social media? Do you feel challenged while doing it, or that it requires skill from you? So when I began my honours, I wanted to investigate flow's link with problematic social media use. But quite early on in the initial literature review, I noticed key inconsistencies within current research. For example, the methods of flow measurement varied across studies. The definitions of experience characteristics were inconsistent. For example, one study defined a sense of control in one way and another defined it in a completely different way. And the flow characteristics measured varied greatly between studies. So some even added in new characteristics such as curiosity and telepresence. I also haven't found any qualitative studies that specifically explore flow on social media. So most of them, if not all of them, are quantitative. And so if you know of any qualitative studies about flow on social media, we would be very appreciative if you could send them our way or let us know where to find them. So there are a lot of qualitative studies that explore flow in other activities like online gaming, internet use, and offline activities, but I haven't come across any specifically investigating flow on social media. What I found most interesting from the literature review, and probably most significant, was the inconsistency in flow was measured. So far of the 65 studies found to explore flow on social media, noting that these were all quantitative, and I have eliminated some as I didn't specifically state what characteristics they measured. But across these 65 studies that I included, they measured an average of just 2.5 of the 9 core flow characteristics to determine if participants were experiencing flow. And you can see here that complete concentration and enjoyment are highlighted as they were the most commonly measured, while the other core characteristics were predominantly ignored. And again, this varied from study to study. But measuring such few characteristics, especially if they're predominantly measuring complete concentration and enjoyment, can become problematic as there is a risk of incorrectly defining the social media users' experiences. So to give you an idea, you can see here 3 overlapping circles, each representing different experience phenomenon. So we've got peak experience, peak performance, and then flow down the bottom here. You can see on the outside core characteristics that differ between the experiences. And then in the middle, there is a list of overlapping characteristics. And you obviously can't read it as the graph is quite low resolution. But in the middle here, enjoyment and complete concentration are actually overlapping characteristics for all 3 of these experiences. So this highlights how easily we can incorrectly define a user's experience if we're measuring such few characteristics. So without any convincing research to show that social media users were experiencing flow due to so few characteristics being measured in the current research that I had read, I decided to strip my pilot study back to one simple question, and that was, do social media users experience flow? So I used constructivist grounded theory to reduce the risk of applying preconceived ideas onto the data and to capture the complexity of the experiences, something that is quite difficult to do via quantitative research alone. And I wanted to begin building a theory from the ground up. So I knew that because I was doing an honours degree, which was only a 1-year course, I would not have the time to be able to develop a full theory or to reach data saturation, which is where no new information is found. And Steve will talk about this in a little bit in more depth. So we decided to approach the study as a pilot study with the intention of potentially expanding it into a full study in my PhD. And although I didn't actually reach a full theory, the very early data gave us some super interesting insight into social media users' absorption and what they're actually experiencing. But before I jump into the results, I'm going to pass over to Steve, and he's going to talk to you about the methods that were used within the study.
Thanks, Olivia. So as Olivia has already mentioned, she used the grounded theory research method for her pilot study. In this part of the presentation, I'd like to talk about that research method and some of the challenges it presented for her. The term grounded theory means different things to different people, so I'll try to be explicit about the approach that Olivia took during her study. The original grounded theory method was first described more than 50 years ago by Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss in their book, The Discovery of Grounded Theory. But in the decades that followed, different approaches emerged, each with their own variations. Variations in terms of data collection, coding, theory development, and so on. So, for example, today we have classic grounded theory associated with the work of Barney Glaser. We have Straussian grounded theory, developed by Anselm Strauss and Juliet Corbin. We have constructivist grounded theory, developed by Kathy Sharmaz, and situational grounded theory, developed by Adele Clark. The method that Olivia employed for her study was constructivist grounded theory, developed by Kathy Sharmaz. So this approach emphasises the researcher's role in constructing the meaning of the gathered data. It focuses on how participants interpret their experiences and how researchers co-construct the findings with them. So this approach is probably a little more flexible than the more structured methods of classic and Straussian grounded theory. But I'm probably getting a bit ahead of myself. For the benefit of those who are unfamiliar with the method, what is grounded theory? Well, it's a qualitative research method for building a theory from data. Not testing a theory, but building a theory or explanation. When you adopt this method, you don't start your investigation with a preconceived theory or hypothesis that needs to be proven. Instead, you begin with some research questions and you allow the theory to emerge from the data that is collected. The data that the theory is derived from usually consists of interviews, observations, or documents, but it can be much broader than that. Grounded theory researchers are often encouraged to avoid the usual practice of reviewing the relevant literature at the outset of their study. And the idea behind this recommendation is that it supposedly helps to keep your mind open to the data. It helps you to avoid making assumptions about what ought to be found in the data. And then later, once the emerging theory is close to completion, you then review the literature with the aim of relating it back to your work. So to illustrate this idea, Barney Glaser, one of the co-founders of the grounded theory method, says that avoiding the literature keeps the researcher free of received or preconceived concepts that may really not fit work or be relevant to the study. Now, do all researchers agree with Glaser's recommendation on avoiding the literature at the beginning of a grounded theory study? No, they don't. Personally, I don't agree with the practice. I certainly acknowledge the need to be open-minded, but I don't support the idea of avoiding the literature altogether. I share Kathy Sharmaz's view on this matter. She wrote, "Grounded theorists increasingly recognise that a lack of familiarity with relevant literatures is unlikely and untenable. Researchers typically hold perspectives and possess knowledge in their fields before they decide on a research topic. Examining committees expect such expertise. Funding agencies require it." So if you want to formulate good research questions, you need to review the literature. If you want to avoid reinventing the wheel, you need to review the literature. All researchers have background knowledge. We all have biases. Pretending that we don't is really just unhelpful. Lots of studies have shown that grounded theory researchers are quite capable of suspending their knowledge of the literature and allowing a theory to emerge from the data. We don't automatically try to substantiate preconceived ideas simply because we reviewed the literature. And I think Olivia's pilot study is a good example of that. Although she reviewed the relevant literature at the outset of her study, her findings did not mirror what she found there. As we'll hear shortly, some of her findings were quite contrary to the literature. The data for a grounded theory study can come from lots of possible sources, but in-depth interviews are a common one. In-depth interviews are not like structured interviews. They have a more flexible style of questioning. They're all about understanding experiences from the study participant's perspective. One of the drawbacks of using in-depth interviews is that they're subject to the same exaggerations and distortions that you get in any conversation. But the participant's perspective is really central to this kind of study, and the only way you can get that is to rely to some degree upon their testimony. In Olivia's study, the data was collected through face-to-face, in-depth interviews with voluntary study participants. Each participant was 18 years of age or older. They used social media regularly, and they had experienced a flow-like feeling while engaged in social media or in other activities like playing computer games or work or sports. The interviews were recorded and transcribed to provide accurate records for analysis, and all of the usual ethical procedures were followed to protect the well-being of the participants. In addition to the interviews, the participants also completed a short pre-interview questionnaire just to gather some basic demographic details and basic information about their social media use. The questionnaire also helped to raise the participants' awareness of their regular social media use and experiences before their interview, and that was also helpful. The participants in a grounded theory study are commonly selected using a procedure known as theoretical sampling. Now, this is quite different to the traditional statistical sampling you might use in a quantitative study. Theoretical sampling is not about getting a representative sample of a population. It's really about maximising your opportunities to explore key ideas. So the study participants are picked according to their potential for providing new insights. Data analysis in Olivia's study had 3 phases, which Sharmaz refers to as initial coding, focused coding, and theoretical coding. Some people refer to these phases by different names, but let's discuss each one in turn. The first phase is known as initial coding. So this involves identifying significant concepts in the data. For example, if your data consists of interview transcripts, you might break those transcripts down into discrete incidents, events, actions, ideas, and so on. You compare those incidents for similarities and differences, and significant incidents are assigned labels known as codes. So a code identifies a concept. It represents something significant in the data. A code is an abstraction in the sense that it represents something from not just one person's story, but the stories of several study participants. Incidents that share the same characteristics are given the same code to indicate that common link. And a single incident might be given multiple codes. In fact, researchers are encouraged to assign each incident as many relevant codes as possible. To illustrate this idea, here is a coded passage from Olivia's pilot study. The study participants' comments from an interview appear on the left, and the codes that have been assigned by the researcher appear on the right. So for example, in 2 of those paragraphs, you can see the code absorption has been attached to the commentary. Another code, Instagram, has been applied to that same passage. And there are many other codes highlighted in different colours. So losing track of time, interesting content, work, TikTok, and so on. Codes can be attached to chunks of data of any size, phrases, sentences, whole paragraphs even. And different researchers code their data in different ways. Some researchers write directly on their interview transcripts, some write on cards. In Olivia's case, she used in vivo qualitative data analysis software to help. The second phase of grounded theory analysis is known as focused coding. This is the process of sorting and synthesizing those initial codes into more abstract categories. It's about identifying the most significant and frequent codes and developing them into broader categories. So it happens fairly naturally as data collection and analysis progress. The third phase of grounded theory analysis is known as theoretical coding. This phase involves figuring out how the emerging concepts relate to each other. The concepts that emerge during initial and focus coding are connected with ideas about the relationships between those concepts. So for example, one concept might appear to have a causal influence on another concept. One concept might be a precondition for another concept. So these relationships, like the concept, they emerge from the data through the coding process. If you decide to skip the theoretical coding phase, you will still have a theory of sorts, but it will be more like a list of themes, a bit thin and not particularly well integrated. So if building theory is the aim of the exercise, then it's worth taking that extra step and presenting the findings as a set of interrelated concepts, not just a list of themes. Another important part of the grounded theory method is writing theoretical memos, which are basically notes to yourself about codes and their relationships to each other. So these memos capture and record the emerging theory. They accumulate until it's time for you to sort them into an outline and write up the completed analysis or theory. Theoretical memos capture the researcher's ideas at the moment they occur, before they disappear. If you refuse to interrupt the coding process to write a memo to yourself, those ideas will probably be lost as your mind moves on to new thoughts and more coding. So now that you have some sense of the activities associated with data collection and analysis in a grounded theory study, you might be wondering, at what point does the process end? When do you stop interviewing and analysing? Well, theoretical sampling continues until the study reaches a point known as theoretical saturation. That's when your data collection has stopped telling you anything new. It's no longer adding to the concepts and relationships that are being explored and developed. Now, the notion of theoretical saturation presented an interesting challenge for Olivia's study, which was part of a 1-year honours degree, not a master's degree or a doctorate. We knew that the limited time frame of her course would not allow for a complete grounded theory to be developed. We knew that theoretical saturation would not be reached in that time frame. So to allow for that, we framed it as a pilot study with the intention of laying a foundation and trialling the methods associated with data collection and analysis. Only 3 individuals participated in the pilot study. So would that be enough to generate any meaningful findings? This was one of the big questions hanging over the study at the outset. But as we discovered, the outcomes of this pilot study produced some very interesting, valuable findings, which fed into a doctoral study that followed. So I hope that has given you some understanding of the grounded theory method that was used for this study, I'd like to conclude my part there and hand back to Olivia to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Steve. So as Steve mentioned, the study involved 3 participants. They were aged between 25 and 35 and included 2 females and 1 male. All were active on social media for at least 2 to 4 hours daily across platforms like Facebook, Instagram and TikTok. And their professions were diverse, ranging from healthcare to construction, which provided a bit of a base for varied perspectives during the 60-minute in-depth interviews. So now you have a solid understanding of the methods used. Let's have a look at the results and see if it's possible to gain valuable information without reaching theoretical saturation in a grounded theory study. So as you know, the goal was to work toward understanding if social media users experienced flow as defined by Csikszentmihalyi. So the data that I collected from the 3 participants revealed 8 of the 9 core flow characteristics. And here we have an example of each that describe the user's experiences within the table. So while you could assume the reports of so many flow characteristics actually means participants experienced flow on social media, the combination of these characteristics are really important to acknowledge. For example, complete concentration, so participant 3 said, "You won't respond because you'll be so absorbed in your phone." And time distortion, participant 1 said, "You could be on there for hours and you don't know, I often lose track of time." So these were repeatedly reported, but they were rarely reported in an activity that involved a balance of skill or challenge, and vice versa. So a balance of skill and challenge we have here. When I used to run the business pages, I think that requires some skill. There was a lot of strategy and business management. And this was often referred to when we're looking at active social media use. So a balance of challenge and skill came up when they were talking about creating content, responding directly to their friends and their family, or like we have here when they're running a business page. And the same with clear goals. The active social media use tended to involve clearer goals versus passive social media use where they were just scrolling mindlessly through their feed. So it's important to acknowledge here how easily a quantitative study could assume a participant is experiencing flow if they haven't taken into account the activity. For example, if the survey asks if the participant experiences challenges on social media, maybe they'll ask if they feel that they need to use skills on social media, or if they experience complete concentration on social media. Or another question could be, do you experience time distortion while using social media? And the participant may answer yes to all of these questions, but not actually be experiencing flow, because while these characteristics may be present for the participant in some instances using social media, they aren't necessarily occurring at the same time, which is obviously required to experience flow. To make this clearer, let's have a look at the 2 distinct absorption experiences identified via grounded theory coding in this pilot study. So there is a lot to digest on the screen here, so I will walk you through the 2 distinct social media absorption experiences clearly reported by participants. One was flow, you can see in the bottom row here, and then the other was dubbed faux flow by participants, which we can see in the first row here. So faux flow absorption 1 experience was by far the most common absorption experience described by all 3 participants. So the orange text reveals the overlapping characteristics in the 2 experiences. You can see here that breaking the data down via coding actually allowed me to see the different stages of the user's experience. For example, as we move across each column, the experience progresses. So firstly, I identified the participants' different reasons for use. You can see in experience 1, faux flow, this included boredom, to fill in time, to escape, to improve their mood, or vague curiosity, for example, which often resulted in open-ended content consumption or passive content use. So activities that involved vague goals or little to no skill and challenge, such as mindlessly scrolling through their newsfeed. Conversely, absorption experience 2, which could be defined as flow, involved active social media use and included content creation, direct communication, and searching for specific information, which all involved clear goals and challenge and skill. So the participants' descriptions highlighted what they experienced during their absorption states as well. And we can see here in the orange that this is where the participants described the most similar experience characteristics across both absorption experiences. And you can see that some of the most commonly measured flow characteristics in current quantitative literature were described across both experience types. So this included complete concentration, time distortion, loss of self-awareness, and enjoyment as well. They were all described across both experience types. So this highlights how easy it can be to potentially inaccurately define a user's experience as flow without taking into consideration the rest of the experience, such as the reasons for use, the activity characteristics, which involve different levels of skill, challenge, and goal types, which are obviously all important characteristics of flow, and then post-activity experiences as well. So in this slide, the key differences between the experiences are highlighted. For example, in absorption experience 1, so flow, using social media for boredom, escapism, or curiosity, such as just to see what's happening, were typically associated with vague goals. Participants also repeatedly reported how scrolling through social media mindlessly required no skill or challenge. And they also reported slipping into absorption very quickly and easily. Now, all of these aspects contradict a flow experience, which typically involves clear goals, challenge, and skill. And as we discussed earlier in the presentation, Csikszentmihalyi described the balance of challenges and skill as the two theoretically most important dimensions of the experience. Remembering that the right balance of challenge and skill requires all of our cognitive resources, triggering the complete concentration. So if the activity is too easy, the person gets bored, or if it's too difficult, they can become overwhelmed, and both prevent absorption in the activity. So the fact that the challenge and skill appear to be missing during the absorption users predominantly described raises a key question, and that is if a balance of challenge and skill are not triggering the absorption state in faux flow, then what is? So as described on the last screen, you can see in the table that the absorption experiences mid-activity is very similar between flow and faux flow. But post-activity experiences were notably different. So instead of experiencing a sense of achievement or progress, as often associated with flow, participants mostly described that it was fun while it lasted, it was a waste of time, and all three even described a sense of guilt at times. And then there was obviously the descriptions of feeling more relaxed, so after using it as a form of escapism or mood improvement, and to take their mind off things, they felt better for it temporarily. So conversely, in the activities that required skill and challenge, a sense of achievement, growth, and progress were described post-activity. So for a direct comparison, one participant was a long-distance runner and she was also a high social media user. And when comparing the post-activity feelings, she specifically said there was never any sense of achievement after mindlessly scrolling on social media, whereas in other flow experiences that she had, she described quite frequently the experiences of a sense of achievement or a sense of personal growth, particularly within work or within her training as well. The importance of differentiating these experiences more can be seen within some research. For example, here we have a study by Bralevskaya that found beating boredom, feeling in time, and escapism was significantly positively associated with flow and addictive social media use. So this study measured 3 flow characteristics, including time distortion, complete concentration, and enjoyment. And they also included curiosity and telepresence as flow measurements, which, as we discussed earlier, are not typical flow characteristics, but have been adopted by some studies in recent years. I've coloured in purple here the characteristics they measured in the 2 absorption experiences reported by my participants. So you can see here in the 2 rows. And we can see from my pilot study that those characteristics actually more closely aligned with the faux flow experience because the activities, boredom, feeling in time, and escapism were typically reported to be more closely associated with vague goals and little to no skill or challenge. And as goals, skill and challenge were not assessed when measuring flow in the Brailevskaya study, we can't 100% confirm if the participants experienced flow and not this faux flow experience in the first row here. Interestingly, the Brailevskaya reported that searching for information and searching for social interaction appeared to be less associated to addictive social media tendencies, which is interesting because these activities more closely relate to my participants' description of absorption experience 2, which was flow, which involved clear goals, skill, and challenge. Although this was only a pilot study and more research needs to be done, it raises important questions such as, is addictive social media use associated with flow? Or is it associated with another potentially undefined social media absorption experience? Or maybe problematic social media is actually linked to multiple absorption types. This pilot study also answered a central research question, which was, do social media users experience flow? We had one participant describe a flow experience, which confirmed this, but participants mostly described absorption on social media that was not flow. We know this because the absorption experiences they described were missing key characteristics, including skill, challenge, and clear goals. My pilot study suggests the operationalizations and conceptualizations of flow in current research may need fine-tuning to confidently confirm if users are experiencing flow. And this is supported by other studies, including this one here from 2016, who identified that research identifies an important and testable phenomenon in which the flow experience is different during social media use than during other online activities. Nonetheless, almost a decade later, the conceptualization and operationalization of flow on social media still remains unclear, and little to no qualitative research has been done. With the insights from the pilot study, I will continue to explore this topic in my PhD with the aim of developing a complete constructivist grounded theory on the nature of absorption experiences on social media. So the objectives will be to identify the characteristics of social media absorption, its association with social media activities and goals, what triggers and maintains absorption on social media versus what disengages and prevents it from occurring, how social media absorption impacts participants, and if there is a link between absorption and problematic social media use. So in doing this, it could help to reduce the risk of unreliable conclusions or misguided recommendations or policies. Can help to guide future research in establishing consistent conceptualizations and operationalizations of the phenomenon. And it can potentially help to better manage or reduce the current negative effects from social media absorption, such as excess screen time and problematic social media use. So although theoretical saturation wasn't reached, the grounded theory methodology has helped to begin bridging the gap in our understanding of social media users' absorption and the associated effects. So coding in-depth interviews of just 3 participants provided a depth of insight into user experiences that is inaccessible via quantitative data alone. And as a result, it revealed key themes and experience relationships that may have been overlooked in the past, and we can now use it as a guide to more clearly pursue promising areas of research. So finally, I just want to thank you for attending today and for listening so far. We welcome any questions, comments, or further knowledge about this research and methodology. And if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to send us an email. Our emails are at the bottom there, olivia.amourgis@cqumail.com, or Associate Professor Stephen Pace. You can contact him at s.pace@cqu.edu.au, and we both hope that you enjoy the rest of this conference.